Graham Platner, he's gone. Like his political career, at least as a candidate for office, seems to be over. Okay, whether he's gonna try to do some Anthony Weiner style comeback, as good as that went, or not, I do not know. But the scandals piled up. First, it was the fact that he had an SS Totenkopf tattoo on his chest, which I said at the time is a losing effort. This is something that could lose him the campaign. It seems like a nearly impossible thing to run with. It's a giant red flag, and that all of his explanations for it were garbage. There were a lot of people who chose to believe Graham Platner when he said he did not know what the tattoo was. I, to this day, don't believe him. I don't believe him, and I got people in the replies like, I'm unsubbing because I didn't know what an SS Death Head is, so it is unreasonable for you to expect him to know what an SS Death. Ridiculous, okay? With how many World War II movies that are saturated around, and the fact that this guy's not only a veteran, he's a Blackwater veteran who goes on message boards to yell about the need for, how attacking armies like claim the symbols of the nations they fight against. That's why they have the Apache. Somebody who's out there on Reddit arguing about the bolts, the SS tattoos that he knows that black people have. Which black people, we have yet to hear the revelation on that. But the lack of a clear answer as to why he had the tattoo, exactly how he truly did not know what the tattoo was, but he just got it covered up, said he didn't know, and some other veterans also get that type of warrior culture tattoo. It wasn't a good defense. It would be something that would dog him for the entire campaign, even if he ended up being the general election nominee. And it was something that got my immediate I don't believe him. I think he's lying. I'm going to say he's lying. Whether or not you want to support him, that's regardless of the fact that I'm not going to bullshit you and say that he isn't lying, because he is. This actually did get clipped and was used to quote tweet, actually. Progressive Victory is grabbed by the Platner tweet. By a spider on the internet, and he gave a little editing magic to my immediate reaction to the Graham Platner story dropping.
Post accounts where he justifies wearing fascist tattoos. So the idea that he didn't know until now, and he just got it covered up because he just found out, that is a lie. He did just get it covered up, but he knew before. You can read forum posts where he justifies his SS tattoo by saying,
man, I know black guys who got the bolts.
You're gonna tell me he refers to
the SS symbol as bolts, but he doesn't know what the SS Death Head is?
Nah, you wanna be lied to. If you believe this, you want to be lied to.
This aged pretty well. I would say this aged reasonably well. Look, at the moment, at the end of the day, I said I want Susan Collins out. We got to figure out what Democrat can beat Susan Collins. We're in a difficult position here. And I said clearly at the time, bluntly and plainly, on Live and Learn, when I was invited on the program to talk about it, that I think that he's a better candidate than Janet Mills, because regardless of the fact that Janet Mills is a sitting governor, she does not seem to want to campaign. She was barely campaigning. She did not either have the energy for it or the desire to do it, or the strategy. I don't know, but she wasn't campaigning. She polled worse than Graham Platner against Susan Collins in every single poll, and she was polling worse in the primary at every single stage. The message that she carried did not match the tone of the Maine electorate, and the fact that she was older, while not necessarily to defeat her, a lot of progressives like Ed Markey, by the way, Bernie Sanders, at the end of the day, it was too many things all at once. And it made it so I think Janet Mills, if she ran against Susan Collins, might have won. There's a possibility she could have won, especially if there's a general upswing against Trump, if he continues to mismanage the economy, more scandals. But I think that the idea that she would win as a result of her own momentum, of building a broad-scale coalition that is energetic, willing to donate, willing to go canvas, willing to go knock doors. I didn't see it. I didn't see that machine forming around her. And she was recruited by the Democratic establishment. She was recruited by Chuck Schumer. She was recruited by people who wanted to beat Susan Collins. And so they just went for Janet Mills, thinking that the sitting governor, who did win an election in Maine, would be the best person to go against Susan Collins, and so they went with her. Now, they didn't just go with her for those reasons. They also went with her because there was not a lot of people willing to throw their hat in the ring. It was a very small amount of people, and Graham Platner was one of those people. And so when you talk about the fault of Graham Platner, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing at the progressive left. But honestly, there is as much finger pointing willing to go around towards the Democratic establishment that provided no clear alternative that showed a strong path to beat Collins. They showed a pathway that might, but when we talk about a pathway that was likely to succeed, that had its own momentum, that had a discernible, strong message, that was willing to campaign in the first place, that's not what the Democratic establishment offered the base. So the base instead went to Senator Totenkopf, chief executive of sloppyism. That's who they went to. And that's who won. And he didn't just win the Maine primary, he won it by large margins, showing his ability to mobilize people, showing his ability to build like a strong campaign around him, and showing that aesthetic of the oyster farming, working class fella who's just too sick of these corporations screwing the little man over. That aesthetic, that device of delivery of a progressive message, a populist message, seemed to be effective. Putting an SS tattoo on top of that message, less effective. Having scandals about his possibly improper relationships with women starting to reveal themselves, even less. Until eventually, there was a Politico story that dropped that seemed to suggest, just flat out claim, that Graham Platner forced his way into a woman's home and forced himself on her. That the story, and I've seen like Ryan Grimm and others trying to clarify, like, well, they don't really talk about too much in the story that he specifically was told, like, oh, I'd really like a massage. And then before she clarified that she didn't want him to come over, that is the window that he came over, and then while incredibly intoxicated, only then broke into her house and did those things. But regardless of what message he was texted to beforehand, regardless if there was a 9-minute gap in time, none of this is a defense. Graham Platner denies these accusations. But after Graham Platner's campaign went to so many people and said, there is no more scandal. And he didn't just do this privately. You could say, well, if he screws over a campaign or a candidate or somebody who endorsed him like Ro Khanna, that's one thing. But he also went on news programs and told the general public, the people who would actually have to vote to get Susan Collins out of office and replace her with a Democrat, he told the general public that there would be no more scandals. And while there might be some people who would be willing to ride or die with him, and he might be willing to continue to deny these claims, saying that they have no substance, the layers of scandals build and build and build. And not only do they have the risk of scaring away centrists and suburban voters, and even some people who would just want to stay home because they wouldn't want to put their name to that vote, it also has the possibility of breaking the momentum that Graham Platner has used to get to the place he is by using a populist message and an aesthetic that is really good at delivering that message. That is not enough to triumph over every scandal. especially when you haven't necessarily fully established your political brand by ever winning an election. Graham Platner was recruited because of his job description, his voting history, and the fact that he donated to Bernie Sanders back in the day. He was recruited by the former, not the former, but the heir to the Toys R Us throne, progressive fella. If he got recruited after running in all these other offices, well, then maybe he'd have some No, this is his first time running for office, throwing his hat into the ring, making a brand for himself, and this is immediately how that brand is established. It wasn't established on the county level. It wasn't established as a delegate or as a state senator, like, for example, Troy Jackson has as the state Senate president. It was instead established this way. So Graham Platner saw this new scandal dropping, saw the negative reaction online, and saw that the endorsements were likely going to get pulled and were then pulled. And he recorded this message. Now, this message is from 4 days ago. And it is essentially a message of, well, maybe we'll drop out. We'll consider some things. Now, he would eventually drop out after this message. We're going to read the message, his dropout message after. But, I mean, he was considering, it seemed like, staying in and trying to find an avenue to do so.
I wanted to directly address the troubling, serious, and false allegations against me.
Also, can I just throw out there, was the scandal so bad that they lost the audio guy on the campaign that quickly? Because audio could be a little better here, but especially since this might be his siren call in politics.
Any accusation of non-consensual behavior is categorically false. Over the last 10 months, I have been deeply humbled by the faith Mainers have put in me. You have welcomed me into your homes, into your places of work, into your restaurants, into your houses of worship. You have shown that a different kind of politics, one that puts the interests of people over corporations, is not just possible, but is inevitable. This movement we have built, the largest volunteer base in the history of Maine politics, the hundreds of thousands of grassroots donors, and the supporters across the ideological spectrum, we were united in a love of Maine, a belief that our politics must change, and a focus on defeating Susan Collins. So, regardless of the inaccuracy of the reporting, but mindful of the political reality it will inflict, we are taking the time to reflect on the best path forward for the state that I love, the people that I love, the movement I belong to, and the goal of defeating Susan Collins. Those were the goals when we launched this campaign, and they remain my goals today. On June 9th, 154,058 Mainers, the most in primary history, voted to reject a broken politics beholden to Washington and the donor class. They voted for hope, for change, to take back our economy, to take back our power, and to take back our Senate seat. Throughout it all, you never turned your back on me, and I will not turn my back on you now. Every one of you deserves to see that vision come to fruition and see Susan Collins defeated, and we will use every tool at our disposal to do so. As Maine goes, so goes the nation. As always, thank you.
Get involved. GrahamForSenate.com. Okay. Now, this was not a withdrawal. This, though, was. In the 4 days that followed, what Graham Platner seemed to have been doing, and what his grouping it seemed to be doing, is using his position as the one who won the primary with 156,000 votes, votes that they will need to win, Democrats with any other nominee, in order to beat Susan Collins. They seem to be holding out on his withdrawal from the race, and the deadline to withdraw was Monday, this upcoming Monday. He seemed to be holding back on it under the idea that they could leverage his withdrawal in order to get some impact on the selection process for a new nominee and make it seemingly tilt that process in a way that could possibly benefit one that is bringing about his vision, his populist economic vision. Now, whether that would be that one woman who was claiming that he was thinking of endorsing her, whether it would be Troy Jackson, who has distanced himself from Graham Platner after really tying himself at the hip to the man earlier in the campaign before a lot of these scandals hit the airwaves, and in some instances a little bit after. It seems that type of angling with the Maine Democratic Party has not really worked. I don't know what exact back and forth they had, as we haven't gotten any description from detail. But if you were to go to the Maine Democratic Party social media accounts and the way that they're talking about it, they are talking about it as if they were essentially given like an ultimatum, and they were not too happy about that ultimatum. Let me give you the statement from Maine Democratic Party Executive Director, who has been really leading the way on the messaging from the party itself on how to react to this problem with Graham Platner. Here is an update that they put out on the 8th, 2 days ago. So I'm reading that before we eventually read his withdrawal, so you can see the backroom dealings that kind of went on that led to Graham Platner's.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to provide you all an update on the U.S. Senate race here in Maine. As you know, the Maine Democratic Party has been working around the clock to develop a process to replace our U.S. Senate nominee that is open, inclusive, transparent, and fair. The integrity of this process is just as important as the outcome, and we are committed to ensuring that Democrats across our state can have confidence in both. Unfortunately, Graham Platner's team has repeatedly reached out to us in an attempt to put their thumb on the scale of what this process looks like. We have repeatedly reiterated to Graham Platner's team that they have no role in determining our next Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate, nor in determining what this process looks like. We have also reiterated that Graham Platner must drop out of this race so that Democrats in Maine can focus on defeating Susan Collins this November. We look forward to making this process public as soon as Graham Platner formally withdraws from this race.
Okay, so they basically rejected the idea that Graham's team should have any impact on how this should go, and they would double down on this perspective again. While the Platner campaign remains focused on distracting from the job of defeating Susan Collins in November with false accusations against us, the Maine Democratic Party remains hyper-focused on developing a representative, transparent, and inclusive process to select a new nominee when he chooses to withdraw from the race. While we may be frustrated with Graham Platner's continued effort to manipulate this process, we are so thankful for his supporters and all of the efforts to defeat Susan Collins. They are a vital part of our party and deserve to participate in an open process to select Platner's placement. And then they go on and on. I think there's more here. Last update we have, seriously, from the party. Today, the Maine Democratic Party held a meeting with our over 100 state committee members who voted to hold a nominating convention to choose a new nominee if there is a vacancy to fill, which obviously, since Platner withdrew today, there is. We will announce the full timeline, details for how the nomination process will move forward, information about how to participate, and requirements for candidates soon. We will keep the public informed throughout the process. Transparency is of our utmost importance. There is an unprecedented amount of energy and enthusiasm among Maine Democrats, driven in part by the many dedicated volunteers and supporters who were inspired by Graham Platner's campaign. We look forward to coming together and harnessing that energy around our new nominee as we work to defeat Susan Collins in November. And the last statement from her being,
as you all know, we have been absolutely committed to transparency. So even though it is incredibly late at night, I am coming to you live on the ground from the Maine Dems headquarters. We are so excited to announce that our process for U.S. Senate candidates is now live. Candidates now have the ability to submit their declaration of intent and begin engaging Maine Democrats in earnest by earning their support and collecting signatures. We are fully committed to transparency, so we are making those candidate rules available to everyone, and you can read them at mainedems.org. We are continuing to race towards the release of our fair and inclusive process to select a new U.S. Senate nominee, and we are not leaving this office until that process is in the hands of you, the people. people. In the meantime, you can expect more updates like this from the ground.
Burns
to
is
Mainers.
immoral.
Thank you for
morally
being in this
corrupt,
effort with
bankrupt
us.
Man.
And for showing the country our resiliency as Maine people. And to the rest of the country watching from afar, thank you for cheering us on. Democracy, while messy, is always, always worth fighting for.
Yeah, so honestly, I would say, and this gives more detail about how you fill out the vacancy and stuff, and you could, if you want to read more or hear more, you can listen to the chair of the Maine Democratic Party, this man right here, Charlie, explain that at a different time, but we don't need to listen to every specific detail. Point is, there's going to be a nominating process. Candidates can submit documents. Troy has already submitted his documents. A bunch of other candidates have already submitted their documents, and they're now giving their positions to the Maine voters as the likely incoming date for this convention that will choose the nominee speeds towards us. I would say how the Maine Democratic Party has handled the situation, given all the pressure, given the national attention, given the negative attention from the Republican Party, given the negative attention from some of, I guess you can call them Graham Platner dead enders, people who are with Graham until the bitter end, and whatever he says the party should do, or whatever he says the selection process should be, that is how it should be. I think that they've handled it quite well. I think that they've handled the, focus on them well. They've handled the negative attention well, and they've kept the process simplistic and on message when it comes to, how we're going to do this, what we're going to do. We're going to do this transparently, XYZ, XYZ. I think they've done a good job on that end. The other end they have to do a good job on, and this isn't just to them, this is up to everybody involved in the process, is they need to pick somebody who carries the torch of what won the primary. That does not mean that you need another oyster farmer of Graham Platner's specific aesthetic, or you hire another person at his oyster company. I don't know. No, what that means is when it comes to a working class centered agenda that wants to take on corporate power and corporate big money influence in politics, that is not interested in sending weapons to Israel, that is not interested in a compromise on the issue of universal health care, and wants to force Susan Collins out with an overwhelming working class populist message, I think that they need to pick somebody who matches that. Now, that doesn't mean, do they need to be a populist specifically? No. Okay. Do they need to sign on to the slopulism? No. But do they need to have a working class agenda? Yes. Do they have to have a pro-union agenda? Yes. Do they have to have a pro-universal healthcare agenda? Yes. Should it probably be a Medicare for all agenda, considering who won the primary? Yes. Should it be somebody who supports what the base believes now on Israel-Palestine? Yes. Should it be somebody who supports Ukraine? Yes. They should generally have the broad swaths of the societal issues covered that helped Graham Platner win his victory. If they try to send somebody out there with a different message, oh, let's have another return to normalcy. Oh, I believe that business and workers can work together. That's not the message they want. I don't care if you like that message or don't like that message. That is not the message Maine's voters want. Janet Mills polls worse than Graham Platner today, post all these scandals. So obviously, the message that Democrats actually carry into the general will have an impact on their result to win. It cannot just be, let's hope Trump sucks enough that they will want to remove Susan Collins from the Senate, considering how much Susan Collins tries to distance herself from Trump, how much she likes to tout her independent record, and the fact that she's got more name recognition in Maine than basically anyone else in Maine politics. Like, she knows a high percentage of the amount of people in Maine. It's not a big state, and she's been in politics and been in that position for quite a while now. No, that's something you really need to work to unseat. And so it's not as simple as replacing one linebacker with another, one candidate with another candidate, a D with another D to be on the voting line. No, you need more. You need an agenda that appeals to working class people. You need an agenda that appeals to those people who went out and voted for Graham Platner. And you need to get somebody who has enough name recognition that they can make up for the fact that they're not going to have a whole campaign season. They're only going to have the general in order to face off Miss Susan Collins. And when I think about those check marks, Troy Jackson leads the pack. Troy seems to be the main option. Either way, he wins in red districts as Senate president. He kept winning in a deep, deep red area. He is somebody who is willing to take positions that are necessary to win, as he has a history of, being against gay marriage, of being against abortion. He's changed those positions, thankfully, but it shows that he's not allergic to the necessary whims of electoralism, even if I wish he took a better stance on gay marriage. And so when it talks about electability, he's willing to make compromises. He has that pro-working class message that Graham Platner talks about. In fact, he is somebody who is centered his political beginnings in the labor movement as somebody who worked in the timber industry and even got into politics after doing labor activism. He just got endorsed by AFL-CIO today. So I think that despite Troy Jackson's failings as a public commentator, he's not necessarily the best public speaker, and he doesn't have the same speaking ability or aesthetic advantages that Graham Platner necessarily has. That's not to say he doesn't come off as working class. Loggers are working class. But that is to say that his ability to speak to that, his public speaking ability and his messaging is not necessarily the same. He ran for governor. He came in third. So, I would not say he has the same machine as Graham Platner. Whether much of the Graham Platner machine will be absorbed into Troy Jackson's, or Troy Jackson's machine would even be interested in those people, I do not know. But I think when it comes to checking the most check boxes in order to please the people who got Graham Platner in there, as well as picking somebody who can beat a Republican, somebody who has won in deep, 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 deep red Trump country, plus 20 Trump country, I think Troy Jackson hits all the boxes. And if you believe at all in that DSA wave theory, he was DSA endorsed. So I think the progressives would be mightily satisfied with him. The question is, should the fact that he lost that gubernatorial race in third place put up any red flags? And can he overcome his shortcomings as a public commentator, public presenter, public speaker? Oh, by the way, I didn't finish. I didn't read Graham Platner's withdrawal statement. Let me just read it quickly. See if Danabo edits this in there. To whom it may concern, I write to formally withdraw my candidacy for the United States Senate. On June 9th, 156,084 Mainers voted for a new kind of politics. One that is representative of people down here in the real world, not billionaires, oligarchs, or the political establishment. Mainers voted for Medicare for all, to ban billionaires from buying elections, and for an end to taxpayer-funded genocide and forever war. They voted for time and dignity, for strong unions and jobs they can raise families on, for the hope of buying a home, and for the chance to retire with grace. People are desperate for change, for this broken system to be righted, for the American experiment to be furthered. Over the past 11 months, thousands and thousands of Mainers poured their hearts, time, and talent into a movement to deliver that vision. I will be forever grateful to them. And in submitting this letter today, I seek to further the movement we have built together and further we believe in, and the future we believe in. My name may have been on the ballot. but the ballot line belongs to the people of Maine. And as such, please consider this notice as my official withdrawal from consideration for this office. Fuck ICE, free Palestine, up the hearts, solidarity forever. Graham Platner.